As I've been saying frequently over the last few months, Sony's dominance of the full-frame mirrorless camera market has been killing its rivals, especially Canon and Nikon. To counter, Nikon just introduced the Z7, its first ever full-frame mirrorless camera, and maybe its most important product in a decade. On top of that, it's coming out at the same time as Canon's ES-R, which is also Canon's most important product of the decade. So we're all getting a little bit fatigued with all these new camera launches, especially me. But at any rate, it does give us a chance to compare the two models, and I can say that Nikon Z7 has met most of my expectations, especially around the area of video. However, it does have a few annoying flaws that hold it back from true greatness, but otherwise it's a promising start for Nikon. I slightly prefer the Canon ES-R's body, but they're both rugged, weatherproof cameras that handle great. For me, the Nikon Z7 has better ergonomics, however. Where Canon got a bit experimental with a new touch bar and the touchscreen instead of a joystick, Nikon kept things more classic. If you're used to using Nikon or even Canon DSLRs, you'll be right at home, as it has a similar joystick, power button, and other controls. There are no buttons on the left-hand side, but Nikon did add two function buttons to the front of the camera. Since the focus ring is electronic, you can program it for ISO or other functions. When you switch the camera to manual focus mode, it changes back to focus again. The new large mount lets Nikon build smaller, sharper lenses. However, it didn't take full advantage of that with its first three lenses, which are inexpensive but a bit boring. I tried the 24 to 70mm f4 kit lens and 35mm f1.8 prime, and they were decent but nothing more. Canon, by contrast, had better lenses at launch. Still, you're buying into a whole new system and better things are to come. Nikon will soon release the Nikkor 58mm Noct Z with an insanely fast f/0.95 aperture. Nikon also has 90 aces up its sleeve in the form of its F-Mount lenses. With the $250 FTZ F-Mount adapter, you can use every one of them. I tried out several new models, and they're not only as sharp as they are on a DSLR, but focus just as quickly as the Z7's native lenses. So if you already have a bunch of Nikon lenses lying around, you'll be in good shape right off the bat. The 3.69 million dot OLED electronic viewfinder with an 80% zoom and 60 frame per second refresh rate is brilliant. Sometimes though, when shooting 5.5 frames per second bursts, it just can't keep up. The touchscreen lets you control not just your shooting, but the entire operation of the camera. However, it doesn't flip around like the touchscreen on the ES-R or Panasonic's GH5, so that's not ideal for vlogging. The Z7 has in-body stabilization, or what Nikon calls vibration reduction. That gives you stabilization on any lens, even old models with manual focus. It works very well, letting you shoot handheld at speeds as low as a fifth of a second, and smooths out handheld video as well. It also gives Nikon bragging rights over Canon, as the ES-R does not have IBS. Unfortunately, it only has a single card slot, and it's an XQD model. While that gives you fast transfer speeds, you can't exactly pick those cards up at your local drugstore. Canon's ES-R also has only one slot, but at least it's SD-UHS-2, a more common and cheaper card format. The new EN-EL15 battery, designed to be charged over USB, is rated at just 400 shots. However, I found it'll easily do more than that. I went out for an afternoon, took about 300 photos, and still had 3/4 of the battery left. The Z7 has very wide autofocus coverage with 493 points that cover 90% of the frame. Autofocus on the Z7 is good as long as you're shooting static or slow-moving subjects. In such conditions, nearly all of my shots were in focus. The same sort of thing happens with face tracking. It works fine if the subject doesn't move much, but often fails when they dart around. With a 45.7 megapixel sensor that has no anti-aliasing filter, it produces damn sharp images that are on par with a D850. In low-light conditions, the Z7 is as good as any high-resolution camera, except for Sony's A7R III. Because of the phase detect pixels on the sensor, you can sometimes see banding in low light, especially when you boost dark areas considerably in post. However, that's a problem with other mirrorless cameras too, including the A7R III. Video is a great story for the Z7. While Canon's rival EOS-R camera has a huge 1.8 times crop factor on 4K video, the Z7 can shoot 4K using the full sensor, albeit with some pixel binning. If you want to avoid that too, you can shoot with an APS-C crop factor, which is 1.5 times, and get pin-sharp 4K. Video autofocus is also excellent on the Z7, tracking subjects around the frame with ease. I think it's better than the A7 III at that, but not as good as Canon's EOS R with dual pixel autofocus. Either way, you'll still get significantly less cropping than you would with the EOS R. That means you can profit better from the large sensor, getting better low light capability and shallower depth of field. Shooting speeds are limited to 30 frames per second in 4K, but you can shoot 1080p at 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second with a 1.5 times crop. Who won the debut mirrorless full-frame camera shootout between Nikon and Canon? I'd have to give the trophy here to Nikon. Discounting the high resolution and price, the Z7 is a better all-round camera. The Z7 is a lot more expensive than the EOS R, but much of what I said applies to the Z6, which is actually the cheapest of the three. None of these cameras, however, can beat Sony's A7 III and A7R III just yet. Should you dump your DSLR and get the Nikon Z7? I'm not sure I'd recommend that just yet. It does excel at portrait, landscape, product, and other types of more laid-back photography. If you're going with action or wildlife though, I'd probably get a DSLR or Sony's A7 III or A9. If you do a lot of video though, then the Nikon Z7 is a better choice than the Canon EOS R and maybe even a better choice than Sony's A7 III, thanks to the 10-bit external video. If you don't need full-frame video though, then Panasonic's GH5 or GH5S or the new Fujifilm X-T3 are probably better options. Another option is to just wait. Panasonic is set to release its own full-frame mirrorless cameras, and reportedly Canon might release a new EOS R model soon. However, if you need a good full-frame mirrorless camera now, Nikon Z7 is a great choice.